Hello, this is psychology and this is social influence. And in this video lesson we're going to look at factors affecting conformity. So this is page 10 of your booklet. We're skipping slightly ahead simply because I find it easier to teach it in this order than doing the other topics in between. So we'll come back to those other two topics that we've skipped over next after this. So, factors affecting conformity, and this is all about some variations of Asch's experiment that he did, and about what they found, and some that other people have done as well, what they found about different factors that affected conformity, like whether they increased or decreased it. So, yes, Asch was looking at conditions that led to an increase or a decrease in conformity, and there were three things that he looked at: group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. Unanimity means, is the rest of the group unanimous? Are they all saying the same thing? So let's have a look at each of those factors in turn and see what happened. So if we look first at group size, you can see here what's happened. So along the bottom of the graph here, you can see the group size increasing. So when you've got only one person, we only have 4% conformity. When you've got two, we have 14%. When you've got three, we end up with 32%. And there's probably a table somewhere, or they've picked out some kind of key percentages in your booklet that you can note down. But you can see there's quite a steep curve initially as you increase the group size. And after we get to 3, it then drops off. Right, it does still increase a little bit, but it's more or less the same. There's very little difference when we add people after that. So what Asch's conclusion from that was that 3 people is about the optimum size for a group. That's where you get the most conformity. Then after that, it doesn't really have any effect to add more people. So here I've put that all on a PowerPoint slide for you to make some notes from. With one other person it's 3%. With 2, if you're not familiar, by the way, with the term confederate, that's just another way of saying accomplice, an accomplice of the researcher. 2 others, 13.6%, and then it went up to 31%. So there you go. 3 considered the optimal group size for conformity to occur. So it doesn't need to be, and if you think about Asch's original experiment, which was 7 or 8 participants, it doesn't need to be that big. Right, second factor, unanimity. And this is all about what happens if out of that group of people, one other person also gives the correct response. What happens to the conformity rate? And when he did this, he found that, as you might guess, it reduced conformity. So what's happening here, you might need to try and visualise this if you're not clear on this factor. Let's go back to Asch's original experiment where you've got 7 people. The participant is second last. You've got the first person says the wrong answer, so they're all saying B when it's A, for example. The first person says B, the second person says B. Let's imagine the third person then says A, then everyone else says B, then it gets to the participant. And the participant has to choose whether they conform and say B, because most other people have said it, or whether they say A, which they know is the correct answer. And Asch found that in that case, conformity reduced to 5%, remembering that the original was 36%, so it's led to quite a big drop. It's giving them like what we call social support, like an ally sort of thing, to help them what we call behave independently, kind of resist the power of social influence, resist the power of conformity. So there you go, that's factor number 2, unanimity, whether or not the group is unanimous, and if it's not, then conformity drops. Okay, third factor, task difficulty. So Asch made the line judging task more difficult by putting the lines closer together. So let's have a look at this. Here's an example. On the left, that's like the original, where it's really obvious what the correct answer is. On the right, if the lines are brought together in length, if you look at those yourself, it's quite hard actually to tell which one it is. I think I would say it's B, but if everyone else said C, I would go with C. So that's what Asch did. And what he found again was that actually conformity increased because people were unsure. In the original, if we look back at these, in the original one, the idea is he's giving them a really easy task, so it's really obvious what the right answer is, so that he's making them say something they know not to be true to conform. Whereas in this one, what's happening is you have something slightly different happening. It's not people conforming because they don't want to stand out. It's people conforming because they don't get it, because they're not sure. They're looking to other people for information. We call that informational social influence, and we'll do a whole lesson on that. But yeah, when the task is made more difficult, then people are more likely to conform if it's a tricky task than if it's something that's really obvious. Okay, let's look at evaluation. So the first thing to say is that Asch's study supports the idea that group size changes it, that group size affects conformity. There's also a second study, and that's by Williams and Sogon, and they found that when people were with friends doing a conformity task, they were notwithstanding the number of people in the group. If they're with a group of 6 friends, they're far more likely to conform than if they're with a group of 6 strangers. Okay, so it suggests that actually what people think is far more important than just like the size of the group, what people think of the people they're with. So I quite like that study because it's adding a bit of nuance, isn't it? It's telling you another factor that's playing into people's decisions. Not just the group size, but also what do you think of the other people who are in the group. And Asch's original experiment obviously was done with strangers because they were all accomplices of Asch. So it'd be interesting to see if someone ran this again with differing groups of friends. It'd be interesting to see what happened when you've got group size and friendships rather than strangers. Okay, second point in terms of evaluation, unanimity. So again, it's supported by Asch. Asch supports the idea that it's important, that unanimity is important, and has an effect on the minority rather. There's another study as well by Allen and Levine, which we use to talk about this factor, where they did a really interesting study where they gave like a dissenter, so in the same way as Asch did, where he gave someone else that gave the correct response. But what Allen and Levine did was they gave an ally to the person who was giving the correct response, but they deliberately made this person look like they were visually impaired. So the partner was wearing glasses with really thick lenses, and it's obviously like a vision-based task, isn't it? So they've done that on purpose. And what they found was that actually, if they did have social support in that sense, it didn't affect their conformity. The conformity rate stayed more or less the same. Whereas if there was like another person there who was just normal vision and said the correct answer, then the conformity rates really dropped. So that's saying that actually if the group isn't unanimous, it's not just a case of having social support, it's about having social support that's respected. So yeah, it's not simply about having that other person, it's about having another person there who we're prepared to stand with and whose opinion we respect. Okay, so that's a criticism, that particular point. Right, next one, task difficulty. Right, so Crutchfield gave his participants a more difficult task and found they were more likely to conform. So that that supports the idea, doesn't it, that when you increase task difficulty, conformity increases as well. And then another study that we had was by Lucas, and Lucas found that conformity was higher in students with more difficult maths problems than easier ones, especially for those who are not confident in maths. So again, that's reinforcing the idea that if we are finding something difficult, we're more likely to conform because we're looking to other people for information. So where they've made the maths problem more difficult, people are conforming more. So there we have it. Those are your 3 factors, each with 2 evaluation points. So I'm setting you a task, which I'll show you now, to do on this, which is just to reinforce the different points that basically the content for the description, to make sure you understand how each of these factors affects conformity, whether it goes up, down or the same. And then there's an application question for you to do as well, and we're going to discuss both of those tasks in the lesson tomorrow, which will be at the normal time. So have it ready, have it with you, and be prepared to talk about the answers. Okay, thank you.